All right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Economic Development Authority. Tonight is Tuesday, November 12th. Audra, can you have the record show that our city planners present along with Council Member, I'll start on the side, Dunlap, Katie's absent, Councilmember Dahl is present, Councilmember Morris is present, along with the Assistant City Administrator and the City Administrator. At this time, we will consider our approval of our minutes from July 22nd, 2024. We have a motion?
Madam Mayor.
Yes, Brittany.
Is this on? There it is. I'll make a motion to approve the EDA minutes from July.
Second.
Okay, motion by Brittany, seconded by Jeff. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Next item is our bills and communications. Nothing's listed. Adam?
Madam President, there are no bills on the agenda this evening.
All right, moving on to new business. Item 4.1, finance plan for lease revenue bond series 2024A.
That works.
President and Commissioners, thank you. Just going to do a brief overview of the memo in the packet materials this evening. So included there is a finance plan, which Representative Jessica Green from Northland Securities will present here shortly. There's a proposed municipal advisory service agreement included in the packet. There's a resolution that's been drafted by bond counsel and included for discussion tonight. And then there's some updates on meeting outcomes. This is the first discussion the EDA is having and being presented with this information. We'd be looking for feedback on how to proceed. And there's a brief outline of the remaining steps on the issuance of the lease revenue bonds. With that, I will introduce Jessica Green with Northland, and she will review the finance plan with the commissioners.
Adam, thank you. Madam President, Commissioners, good evening.
Good evening.
Evening.
As Adam just went through, you do have a number of items in your packet related to the proposed issuance of lease revenue bonds through the EDA and for the betterment of the city of Otsego for the proposed construction of the fire and emergency services facility here in the city. I will plan to go over the proposed finance plan. The finance plan is in draft form, so just a couple of quick comments before I go through that finance plan. And I'll start off with the executive summary that's on page 2 of that plan that covers sort of the high level details. But the finance plan, again, in draft form, the reason being is that as Adam and I were talking about some of the preliminary structure thoughts, is that we wanted you to have sort of a discussion tonight around kind of what you wanted to see for structuring terms, what you wanted to see for cash going into the project, if you wanted to put cash into the project to buy down that project in terms of how much you wanted to issue for bonds, if you wanted to continue moving forward. So what we have here for a discussion tonight is a size of $18,420,000. What that allows for is a $2 million contribution to the project in cash and a 20-year structure. So we've talked a lot about different structures, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. And what we settled on here, again, for discussion purposes only, is that we would start here because one, it allows for a nice amount of capital going into the project of $2 million. And then a 20-year structure because this really allows for the lowest overall cost of borrowing for the city, because again, it's 20 years rather than going with something longer. Now, happy to look at other options. And we don't want you to walk away from the conversation today thinking that you need to make a decision. Certainly any guidance that you can give us today is helpful. So even if you sort of narrow things down for us, we can certainly continue to work on options, but you don't have to feel like you need to make a decision today, but really just looking for some discussion. And again, if you want to narrow things down for us, that would be great. So with that, I will again start off on page 2 with that executive summary. The purpose of the bonds, of course, is to finance the fire and emergency services building. The bonds would be sized, of course, to include the cost of issuance of the bonds. The security for the bonds would be the pledge of the lease payments coming from the city to the EDA. As we've discussed, there would be no general obligation pledge on the bonds, and the lease payments would be subject to that annual appropriation coming from the city and then paid to the EDA to make that debt service payment. Bonds here would mature annually each February 1 in the years 2027 through 2046, again, assuming that 20-year structure. And then we'd have interest due on the bonds payable August 1st for that first interest payment, and then semi-annually thereafter, February 1 and August 1 of each year. True interest cost currently is estimated at 4.26%. We won't know what that is until we actually issue the bonds. The timing of that is flexible depending on when or if the EDA and the council choose to move ahead with the bond issuance. Based on current timing, we are anticipating that we'd have an optional redemption here beginning February 1 of 2033 and any day thereafter at a price of par plus accrued interest based on that call date. You'd also have an extraordinary redemption feature here. So if something happened to the building, so if there was, for example, a tornado or a fire or something like that, you'd have that extraordinary redemption language written into the lease as well. We would seek a rating for the issuance given the size, and the structure that you're seeing here along with that estimated interest rate assumes that a rating of AA would be assigned to the bonds. The bonds would be considered tax exempt. There would be certain risks, of course, in issuing the bonds, as there are with issuing any sort of debt. Those risks are outlined in the attachments here along with the finance plan. And then what we're considering here is that the city would issue the bonds via a public sale, so with competitive bids received. Now, based on the current timing, and this is flexible, as I mentioned, we would receive those competitive bids on December 9th. So Northland would receive those bids on behalf of the city, and we'd come back before the EDA on December 9th for award of the bonds to the lowest bidder. If the EDA were to award the bonds, we would then stay for the city council meeting as the EDA's award is contingent upon the city council concurring with that award. So all of that would transpire on the same evening. Now we're, again, flexible, so that timing can change if the EDA and the city wanted to change that timing. Moving on further into the finance plan, you have the sources and uses found on page 3. So sizing again here, par amount of the bonds, $18,420,000 based on the current assumptions within the plan. There you're seeing that $2 million issuer contribution, and then the uses of funds below that. So currently we have the deposit to construction fund, $19,218,761 based on the bids that were received. My understanding is that's whittled down a bit based on conversations that Adam and I had on Friday. That number was finalized on Wednesday when the packets were put together. So that number will likely come down some. So just know that we're not married to these numbers that are in here. They are preliminary. We've got some capitalized interest in here that would cover the 8/1/25 and the 2/1 of 26 interest payments. Underwriter's discount, about $15 per bond here. So $276,300. That is an estimate. We won't know what the underwriter is going to charge until the date of sale. Cost of issuance of $133,907. So that covers all of the costs of issuance here. So we've got your legal fees, we've got your rating fees, we've got municipal advisors. So that would be Northland in there. We've got your bond trustee and your paying agent, and then other miscellaneous fees that all sort of add up to that $133,907. And then finally, you've got your rounding, about $3,500 there. So bonds are issued in $5,000 denominations. So that's where that rounding comes in. The city gets that back at time of closing. You can use that for project costs, debt service, etc. So then from there, we just kind of go through the various details here. So authority, again, we're looking at 469 and 465. The commissioners will recall that nice memo that Taft put together when Mara was here with Taft. We reviewed all of the various steps related to the borrowing authority, reviewing the fact that, of course, the EDA does have the ability to issue these bonds. We go through the structure and the security again, plan rationale and issuing process. And then, of course, the team is outlined on page 4 with municipal advisor being Northland, bond counsel being Taft, and then your paying agent here being US Bank, also serving as trustee. From there, we get into the preliminary debt service schedule. Again, this assumes that 20-year structure. So we've, of course, looked at other structuring options as well, looking at that 20 and 25-year, and then also a 30-year structure. Happy to review those as well. And then some related considerations for the EDA and the council to consider. And then last but not least, I'll just go over the calendar of events. So here we are sort of right in the middle, reviewing the finance plan here with the EDA. We do have the rating call scheduled with the rating agency next week. Now, we are happy to push that back if the EDA and the city are not ready to hold that call at this point. We've got it on the calendar in case that you want to move forward, but it is absolutely flexible at this point. Assuming that you do want to move forward, however, we would anticipate receiving that rating the week of Thanksgiving. And then again, moving ahead with the sale in early December with the bonds closing by the end of the year. With that, I'll conclude my comments on the finance plan, but I'm happy to take questions or dive into any of the detail that's included here.
I have a question, Jessica, regarding the rating call. How long does that last?
The call itself takes about an hour, or that's what we schedule it for. Oftentimes it goes a little bit quicker than that. I want to say the last call we had, Adam, probably took about a half an hour.
Yeah.
And they're just confirming what rating the city
Yeah.
would be getting. Okay.
I would say for less sophisticated cities, the longer it takes. My experience with Otsego is that you're very responsive to questions and well organized ahead of the call. So it goes very well.
And then once we have that in place, is it a month that that's confirmed for the city, or?
It
What?
takes about a week after the call. So the analysts that we work with, so there's typically 2 analysts that are assigned to the call itself.
Okay.
And then those analysts will take it back to a committee. So it's not just those 2 analysts that assign the rating, it's a committee decision. And then within a week, typically we will get the results of that. Now, having Thanksgiving in there can sometimes throw a little bit of a wrench. So a holiday can sometimes prolong that, but I would imagine we'd have it within a week. And then once we have the rating back, it's good for about 90 days. So that being said, and Adam and I talked about this a little bit earlier today, if the EDA or the council wanted to postpone the sale or hold off for a bit, we'd likely postpone the call as well, just to make sure of the timing. But again, S&P is very flexible, so we'd let them know soon if we wanted to postpone that call.
Council, any other questions?
I did have a question as far as the interest rate goes.
Sure.
I know we've used timing is flexible. So do you think this 4.26 is pretty accurate?
So it's tough to say. Obviously,
right.
this past week was interesting, okay, to say the least. We saw markets move quite a bit, of course, on Wednesday and a little bit on Thursday. However, that increase, we actually saw that kind of come back Thursday into Friday. Markets were closed yesterday, continued to come back again today. So really what we saw increase in the market, at least on the muni side, came back. So it's really tough to say what may happen. The Fed announcement really I don't think that played really much into it. I think it was more of like the response to the election, but it's anybody's guess.
And then the true interest rate, we would have that because you're coming back December 9th with this is how we proceed. And then as council, we would then decide to either move forward or not move forward. And we would have that number that night or yeah, okay.
Yep. So once the bonds are offered for sale, so we would go out for bid that morning. So at 10 a.m. we would solicit bids. We would take those in, we would compile all the numbers, and then we would come back before you that evening. And assuming that you liked the results, the EDA would award, and then we would wait for the council to concur with that. At that point, you're locked in.
Perfect.
So the only way that, you know, if you don't like the results, you can reject the bids. But at that point, you'd want to wait a good amount of time before you approach the market again. Just because at that point, the market has kind of given you what they feel is a fair interest rate. So unless, I would say, if you feel that the market is off, you would postpone your sale rather than go to sale and reject bids. So if something seemed wonky in the market, you would postpone rather than move ahead.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions?
Madam President?
Yes.
Ms. Green, can you explain I was under the impression that this would still be subject to the levy limits, the debt limits for the city, but the item in attachment 4 says that it wouldn't be. Can you clarify that?
You said two things, debt limit or levy limits.
The debt limit.
Bear with me.
So am I reading that incorrectly then?
I'm getting there. Hold on a second. Point me to where you're
It's just that second sentence.
on
That-
page
On
9.
what page?
Yeah, sorry, page 9.
For levy limits?
Okay, so this would still apply to debt limits, right?
The bonds would be subject to the city's debt limit.
Okay. So the levy limit would just be, I think that was back in like 2018. We can't raise our levy more than like 3 or 3.5% or something like that is kind of what this is referring to.
Correct, but this is speaking to levy limits.
Right.
Rather than debt limits.
Okay. Yep.
Yep.
I was reading it incorrectly. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Madam President, a few items to review additional with EDA. Things not included in the packet, as Jessica outlined, there is an assumption of a contribution of equity, where that number is coming from. So on the screen right now is a cash flow projection for the capital improvement revolving fund. So over the past few years, fund balance policy transfers have been put into this capital reserve fund. At this point, there is no ongoing revenue source for this fund, so it is kind of our catch-all capital improvement fund. So right now, it does show revenues that are scheduled through 2029, which is the end of the assessments that are included here. And there's also certain capital projects budgeted for out of this fund. So there's one line item for county CIP. So historically, the city has used this fund to pay the local share of any county road improvements within the city. So looking back in the last few years, we've had County Road 39 and the 3 roundabouts that were installed. We've had County Road 38 and 19, the improvements that were done there. So over the next few years, there are projects outlined, and this is currently the budget source for those funds. So in 2025, there is the County Road 137 project near McIver. In 2027, there's a CASA 36 improvement scheduled from Highway 101 to the east. And in 2028, there's a project for the intersection of 39 and 19. The property CIP is currently holding a placeholder for a cold storage facility. The council did approve an agreement to bring this project to a stage where it could be authorized to go out to bid. We don't have, this is the best estimate of the project we have at this point in time, so that is included in there. And then the $2 million as an equity contribution or a cash buy down of the project is something that would source from this fund. So again, being the first time that the EDA and or city council have been privy to the information, this is the source of where that $2 million is coming from. If you look on the very bottom line, forecast for the end of this year, there's approximately $7.8 million in the fund. With the proposed expenditures and incoming revenues over the next 5 years, there is a balance of about $2 million towards the end of this projection. But with there being no ongoing revenue source, that is should be considered more for one-time projects or emergency needs. And that is why the $2 million was proposed as a cash buy down to the project. The EDA commissioners and city council can choose to fluctuate that number up or down, and it can be zero, it can be whatever the EDA commissioners advise. This was a medium starting point to leave some flexibility in the fund for future projects, but also helping with bringing the cost down for this individual project. Questions on that, and then I do have one other slide that I'd like to go over as well.
Madam President,
Yes.
just to clarify, the 2 million that you have there and transfers out is for the cold storage, not an estimate for this, correct?
The 2,219,000 is the cold storage estimate. The 2 million is the transfer out for this
For
project,
this project, okay.
but it does cover both.
Then so if I'm following, then the estimation for the road project is the 735.
For just the 25 year, for reference, last year's budget, before the project has gotten to the design point that it is now, our estimate was about $1 million on the
Right.
project, if I recall correctly. So do I expect it to be 1.125 or 350,000 for the subsequent year projects? I do suspect those are conservative, but at the same point in time, leaving flexibility there because we don't have a good project estimate to go off of.
Okay.
So you see in 2027.
Those are the other county road projects. we
Yes.
talked.
Yes.
Yes.
With that, I'd like to transition to, as Jessica mentioned, there are different ways to, apologize for the little screen icon here. There are different ways to structure an issuance for this. As Jessica mentioned, in the packet is projected at a 20-year amortization. We did look at full issuance and also reduced issuance with the cash contribution. This slide is giving some information. There are a lot of numbers on here, and I wanted to make sure that you were able to grasp those this evening. So all 3 columns on the left are assuming no cash contribution. The 3 on the right are assuming a cash contribution. So in general terms, as you go from a 20 to a 30-year amortization, your debt service costs go up. So looking here near my cursor, to add 5 years onto the payment schedule, the interest costs do increase by 3.2 million, or roughly thereabout. The good thing about that is that you're extending that payment over time, so your levy does go down. So here there's a lot of numbers, but in general terms, in both scenarios, whether you're contributing cash or whether you're not, the cost goes up with each year of amortization. Your principal payments are being spread out over more years, but your interest is on there for longer as you're not paying that mortgage amount down. So the levy would decrease. And then as we get down here further, we do have some tax calculations. So the number here at the top is the net tax capacity estimate that we're working off of for the 2025 levy. This tax rate would be applicable only to this levy itself. And then there are residential homes ranging from 300, including the median value at 386,400, 500 and 600,000, as well as a commercial industrial property to show the impacts on year 1. These numbers may fluctuate up or down depending on the value of an individual home. So if a $386,000 home goes up to 400,000, this impact will go up by $1 or $2. If the total tax capacity continues to go up with future growth, more homes, more businesses, this number would go down. So it's not likely that only one of those two things will happen. It's more likely that the two will kind of net each other out. Tax capacity growth and home value increases and or decreases kind of will offset each other. So the impact here would be for the life of the loan, whether that's 20, 25, or 30 years. And again, related only to the debt service on this project. There are a lot of numbers here, and I can certainly go through each individual scenario. Again, as Jessica mentioned at the onset, the lowest cost of borrowing is the 20-year option, but it does carry the highest average levy over the life of that repayment schedule as well. So the average levy is not what each individual year will be, but over the 20 or 25 years, that's what the average amount will be. So again, just confirming that it is cheaper on the levy side of things to extend the term. It's cheaper on the annual tax impact to extend the term, but overall costs of borrowing are higher as you extend that term. So
Why isn't it the same payment amount every year?
Because you have ascending yields on each term of the bonds.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good one, Adam. So, as you can see,
The coupon?
Yep.
Yep.
So the coupon rate is going to change in each and every year. So your interest is going to change, and you have $5,000 denominations for in each maturity. So you're just not going to get round numbers that fit nicely into. It's not going to be the same as your mortgage payment or a car payment. So you don't have a single interest rate.
Okay. Do we know what that final rate is when we approve? When we go out for bond, when we go out to bid on this, what we get back is that final rate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. So when you're awarding based on the lowest true interest cost. So you know what that rate is when you're awarding. That won't change. The only time that changes is if you're refunding your bond. But then you're going through that new sale process again. But otherwise you are locked in on the date of sale. So.
Adam, if you can go back to that previous worksheet.
yes,
Is that based on a principal and a interest payment then?
it's based on the levy amount that would support that principal and interest payment.
Okay, so the average payment is what
Yeah,
you're
and,
saying?
and so maybe Jessica can explain this better, but your payments and your levy schedule are actually slightly different. So I'll let you.
Sure. So your payment amount, your principal and interest, plus a 5% over levy, because statute requires that you have at least 105% of what is due in your debt service fund prior to the payment that's coming up. The reason being is that if you're collecting levy, you have to assume some amount of delinquency could occur in your tax collection. And you need to make sure your debt service fund is whole to make sure that your debt service payment is made. You can't have your debt service fund being short. So you're collecting a little bit extra. Now, you plan for that additional 5% over levy. So that's what your levy schedule ends up looking like. If you do have strong collections in, say, your first couple of years, you can manage your levy down so that it's exactly what your principal and interest that you need. So let's say that you do collect that additional 5% the first few years, and you've got that extra 5%. You don't have to collect that extra 5% each and every year for the full 20 years if you've got that up front. So you can manage it from there. But you do need some extra to make sure that you're allowing for cushion in case of delinquency.
Okay.
And Jessica, the payment times reflect obviously when taxes are
Exactly.
paid.
Yep. So some cities choose to have like a December 15th payment date. So it would be December 15th and June 15th.
Okay.
To sort of reflect that the county tends to pay out beginning of December and sort of beginning of June. But most cities will go with August 1st and February 1st to give themselves extra time in case the county's late, because sometimes the county's not actually paying out until December 10th. And that can make people nervous when they have December 15th payments, because your paying agent will be calling you up saying, you've got payments due in 15 days. And if there's a weekend in there, something like that, that can make people again very nervous. So oftentimes, to give people plenty of time, they will schedule their payment dates on August 1 and February 1 to make sure it lines up very well with tax collections.
Not at this time, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm the one who's paying for it, I'm the taxpayer. So the thing is, the payments over here is only for the loan. How much the device considered to also give information the citizens about the running of the fire department and how much it costs the whole thing, so because it's only clear. So
Yep.
show the-
Right now, we're just talking about the building.
What is what I said,
Yep.
started- That's what it's gonna cost, but it's gonna cost more than that for the taxpayers. And if you do have to just pay the taxpayers, only one who's paying for it.
Jessica? Sorry. Adam?
Madam President, again, with the $2 million, I want to highlight the interest savings here too. So with the cash contribution, you're obviously buying down the principal and you're paying less interest on that. So in this example of $2 million, for that $2 million, you're actually getting 3.1 in total savings, 1.1 of that in less interest, 2 million from the cash contribution that's already on hand. And that number escalates here with the longer amortization. Comparing the levies from a cash contribution to one without, it's about $165,000 on an average year, less in terms of the levy by contributing that cash up front as well. 148,000 on a 25-year and 141,000 on a 20. I'll call it 30, but in technical terms, there is statute that it has to be paid off in 29 years. So I'm calling it 30 out of simplicity, but it is actually 29 by statute. So the longer term issuances do tend to carry a slightly higher average coupon or higher interest cost as well, as they extend further out into the yield curve.
Guess I have a question.
Yes.
Putting in the $2 million, aren't we offsetting the benefit of that by not making any principal payments in the first 2 years?
So when the city's contributing, do you understand the question?
I'm not sure that I do understand the question.
So we're paying down the principal by putting in the $2 million, right? But then we're not paying any principal for the first 2 years. So we're adding on to the cost on the back end. Because we're not paying down any principal, we're paying more interest.
So you would prefer to, you can structure the bonds however you'd like to. So currently we just have level annual payments. But if you would prefer to add principal up front, you can do that, certainly. So if there's an absolute, we're here for discussion. So if you'd like to see a certain structure that adds a large principal payment up front, we can certainly show that.
And maybe one clarification, Commissioner Dunlap, whether that 645,000 is paid in August 1st of 26 or February 1st of 27, that is the same levy year. So if that was a desire to levy, you're levying the same dollars and you can pay that principal on August 1st of 2026, which would
Right.
reduce your interest costs because you're paying that principal down. The levy years don't align with the
With
payment.
the
So
payment.
That's so confusing.
you're,
It's
Because you
because of the delay in collection. So
Sure.
you've already
Right.
certified your preliminary levy, so we can't go above that for collection in 25. So by issuing, if you're issuing this year for too late, which is why you've got the capitalized interest included. So your first collection needs to occur. You've got to sort of time that out correctly. So if you wanted to include principal, you would just be, you'd be increasing the amount of the levy. You see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, in 2026,
Mm-hmm.
right, which we haven't decided yet.
Right. But if we're concerned about pressure on the tax levy and we want to increase principal into the tax levy, that, I mean, because we're doing this exercise to say how much of an increase or how much pressure are we putting on the tax levy? If we do want to increase principal, that's simply going to increase the pressure on the tax levy overall.
But how much are we then not paying in interest, I guess would be my question. I know that's a pretty complicated
Yeah.
calculation here, but are we just throwing, what I'm trying to figure out, and maybe it's just a rough idea, but are we just basically throwing money away because we're putting in money to pay down the principal, but then we're not paying any principal for the first 2 years, which is just accumulating more interest on the back end?
But you're,
But you
buying-
effectively are paying
are paying it
principal by including the $2 million
Dollars.
reduction because you're not borrowing for that. So Adam has, so in the breakdown, the split of
Right.
the full issuance versus,
so it's the 18 for,
yep. So
20.
we've got the total cost, total interest there of 10 million versus so we've got 10.9 versus the 9.7. So you're down, what, the 1,125,000?
one. Right.
So you are effectively saving on interest costs by using that principal reduction. Because you're not, the par amount of the bonds is significantly less. So we would have a par of 2,540,000 versus the 18,420,000. Because we're including that 2 million buy down from the cash contribution.
So the calculations that are on the screen are they based on not having the 2-year principal payment?
Anything on this screen would reflect the same amortization schedule, just with different numbers based on the amount of issuance, but the same principal and interest schedule.
So based on that, then it is more advantageous to pay down some of the principal, obviously, but then we're not completely eating up that benefit by not paying principal for the first 2 years. I get your argument of we're kind of doing that anyway by putting in the money, but in my mind, if you're going to start paying down principal, why not just make full payments? But
Well, you wouldn't be paying principal, I don't think it's fair to say you're not paying principal for 2 years. So you wouldn't be paying principal in 25 anyway.
Right.
So even if you're issuing bonds at the tail end of 25, you wouldn't be making a principal payment on 2/1 of 25. You just wouldn't. Because we'll call it, we might as well say it's a 25 issuance either way. Because you're gonna close on December 30th. So you wouldn't have a 2/1 payment. And in that same vein, you wouldn't have a 2/1/26 payment because you don't have the ability to levy for your 26 payment. So I see where you're going with that, but by including your cash contribution, you are making the principal payment for 26.
okay. Because we don't have the ability to levy for it.
You cannot levy for it at this point. You're past the ability to add that to your preliminary 25 collection levy. So by adding it as your capital contribution, you are making effectively the principal reduction in the debt.
It might be helpful too, looking at the screen, the two blue highlighted, those payments, even though one is in 26 and one is in 27, those are the 26 levy dollars that would be assigned to that. So you're getting a tax settlement from the county in June of 26 to make the August 1st payment. You're getting a settlement in December of 26 to make the February 1st payment. So even though And it does carry over and cost more in interest, of course, but you're assigning those levy dollars to pay those two payments, and maybe that helps visualize.
And can you go back to the other screen, Adam? By taking the 2 million, we effectively, maybe to Ryan's point, could use some of the extra cash on hand that we already have in the other account, and you could add it, infuse it into that 26 number so it doesn't jump up also for the payments that are due. You could take some, you could take,
That would be
You've
an
got about-
option if the EDA wanted to entertain assigning more of those existing funds on hand towards this project. You could retain them instead of putting them to pay direct project costs. You could retain them, but assign them to reducing debt service. One as a phase-in option, or two as a cash contribution each year that the EDA and city council can evaluate, or to try and keep that impact as low as possible.
But it's the EDA that's making this payment every year, right?
Correct.
I mean, the city side of it is that we're levying for a lease payment that goes to the EDA, then the EDA pays the bondholders,
Yes.
essentially.
Yeah.
So I hate to keep bringing this up, but the EDA doesn't have any money. So where's the 2 million going to come from?
The 2 million is a city contribution to buy down its debt over the next 20, 25, or 30 years. So you're contributing that. The city is contributing that money, which lessens the lease payments that it makes to the EDA over each of the next, the term of the loan, whatever the chosen term is. That $2 million is reducing the future levies and lease payments to the EDA.
So is the city then, if we went with $2 million, is the city then just adding an extra $2 million contribution to their first payment, which then the EDA uses to buy down the principal, or how does that work?
this is assuming that we'd be giving the cash right away.
I can speak to that. So the way that the structure works currently, or the way that we're sort of envisioning the documents to be prepared, and this could be changed, but that $2 million contribution would be provided to the trustee. It would be placed into the construction account, and it would be used to effectively provide dollars for the construction of the facility. So it would, along with the bond proceeds, so it would be used up front to construct the facility itself.
So it's like an interfund transfer between the city and the EDA.
I don't know that I would describe it that way.
Yeah, the city is completing and paying for the project, and it is leasing that facility from the EDA who's making the payments, so the city would be financing the project. And then the funding comes from the EDA.
Okay.
Other questions?
And President, I would seek any feedback on preference in terms of whether or not a cash contribution is something that makes sense to each of you. And then also in terms of what the payback term is those are kind of the two main points that we've developed assumptions and prepared a finance plan based off of that, but want to get affirmation or direction on how to proceed with alternative scenarios.
We discuss that now with the 20-year with the 2 million cash. I've always been an
Yeah.
assumption under a 20-year.
With the 2 million cash.
Correct. Well, that's the addition now, but yeah, for sure, 20-year.
Can you scroll Adam to the bottom of this page for me, please? Sorry. Thank you. So, we have, I would agree that budgeting the 2 million makes sense to me also. Kind of came into it thinking potentially a little bit more, but I do, as you were talking through about the using some extra cash in each year, we could decide on what that impact to lower the levy would be. I'm in favor of that. I mean, as you see, and I know that we potentially have other projects and there's not any revenues that come into this account at this point. We don't know what those county projects are, so getting it down to zero probably doesn't make sense, especially if, I'm assuming this would be if something major happened in our city, this is where we would take the funds from, correct, Adam? Like if something that we needed to come up,
To pay.
a
for it.
disaster.
Yeah.
Where's the money gonna come from? I'm just throwing
That's-
it out.
I guess this would be what I would classify in terms of how our financial statements show this amount. It's truly one of the only unassigned balances. It wouldn't be the only $2 million the city has, but it's the only 2 million that isn't assigned to pay debt service for a previous project or operations for the utility department or for the police contracts in the general fund. So it is kind of that unassigned balance that the city can use for one-time projects.
Madam President, another way to look at this fund is this is where all of the surplus money has been going. A little over half of this money is surplus. Anytime we overtax people, that's where this money goes. So,
Or also, this is the money where when we have additional building permits that we don't plan for each year. where the
which
transfers
means we're
come from.
overtaxing people.
I
But-
just, when we make our budget, so we're basing it on a certain number, so.
There's no crystal ball, no, how many permits we'll receive.
Right, but my argument would be this money belongs to the taxpayers. It should be used to offset the next year's taxes if we're overtaxing people. That's what I've said in the past on these kinds of figures.
But you also see that we have large county projects coming up, which how would we be paying for those if we didn't have funds dedicated or set aside for it?
Part of this fund has been a property tax levy in the past. It's not all slush. It's not all surplus.
Usually when you give back surplus, don't you create then a deficit? That would be worse. wouldn't it?
Not if we're taxing accurately.
But we would be
But
giving,
again,
I mean,
We'd rather,
we can use, as I
Yes.
mentioned, talking about lowering the impact each year. There is
A way to give back.
a way that we can lower that burden for all residents. Correct?
if we didn't have it, we would or levy more. Better to have it, and not need it, than need it, not have it.
So let's give some direction to staff and to Jessica is here this evening. So are we on the other sheet, please? Are we looking at a contribution of the $2 million? Where are people at with that?
I'm fine.
Yes,
20 or 2 million.
Brittany, 2025, where are you at?
I think it's but can you go back up? Where's,
Just where you want me
it's
to be.
just not, yeah, it's,
I think the easier way to
25.
decipher the 20, 25, and 30 is looking at the annual impact. Again, using the median value, like
Mhm.
the council does when looking at property tax levies. On a 20-year, that's $140 estimated, $124 on a 25-year. Again, so it's $16 less per year, but for 5 more years in terms of that impact. So.
my keys to looking at is the increase in interest.
Mhm.
Less interest, the better.
Yeah, again, to your point, Commissioner Dahl, the increase from a, excuse me, from a 25-year, from a 20, is an additional 3.195 in interest. The levy goes from 1,439,000 to 1,283,000 under those two scenarios.
So I'm in favor of a cash contribution. And I also think that the 20-year is probably the most responsible way to go.
Ryan, comments?
My number would be 0 and 0, so.
For some reference, over the past few years, the city's financed multiple utility projects, Water Tower 4, the East Biosolids Facility, the West Wastewater Expansion. Each of those have 20-year amortizations. Not saying that's right or wrong with the Public Facilities Authority financing. That's your option. You don't get to pick longer terms. But for the Water Tower 4, the council did amortize that over 20 years. So just for some reference on what length of term has been used on other projects.
So tonight, Adam, you're looking for possible motion.
Yeah, back to, I'll review one more time here. So the resolution, I'll start with the advisory service agreement. So in order to move forward and have Northland act on behalf of the EDA as the municipal advisor, there is an agreement for services. Attorney Kendall has reviewed that agreement. The fee amount of $57,657 is outlined in that agreement. It is contingent upon the EDA moving forward and actually issuing the debt. So if the debt issue is not taken forward, that fee is not due and payable by the EDA. The resolution drafted by bond counsel included in the packet. Basically, if you look at it in terms of the other side of the project, this is kind of the authorization to go out to bid. So it's providing notice of the sale, includes the term of the sale, and authorizes Northland to solicit proposals for those bidders. So again, there is no requirement that any formal action is taken at this meeting. If the EDA does want to move forward with a bond issuance, these two documents would be requirements to be approved in order to finance the project with bond proceeds. There are motions included as possible motions in the packet. Can take any other questions on the RCA.
Would it be best to do them separately or all together? How would you proceed?
I would rather you do them individually. And I guess the third piece in there is to schedule a meeting on December 9th. So as Jessica outlined in the finance plan, that is the day that bids on the financing would be received by Northland and presented to the EDA that same evening, just like bids for a project. And then there is city council action that needs to run concurrent on the same evening with that. So.
And to be clear on the second motion, that'll include the, what we just discussed was the 20, well, will that include the 20-year, yeah, the 20-year plan with 2 million cash?
You want to comment on that, Jessica?
So if you're in agreement, that is the structure that we would move ahead with. We'd do that resizing based on what we talked about with the bidding amount not being that 19,216,000. It would be slightly less than that.
Right.
So we'd do some resizing there. So it wouldn't be the 18,420,000. It would be slightly less. But if you're comfortable with the 20-year structure with the 2 million contribution, that's how we would structure the.
I just have one question though, going
Sure.
with the 20-year plan on options for redemption, so early redemption, if we wanted to look at, does that change anything on those dates then to go? Or does it stay the same?
So if you wanted something other than February 1 of 2033, we can certainly look at that. It would
Does
likely
it change
impact,
anything or impact?
it would likely impact the rate to some
Hmm.
degree. How much I can't comment on today, but I could certainly look into that and have a conversation with Adam based on what the market feedback would be. Adam and I have discussed this quite a bit. So the tough part is if it impacts your rate too much, you're kind of betting on the fact that you would hope that the market is in the right place once you get to that optional redemption, right?
Mhm.
So if you're paying an extra 5 basis points and the market isn't there by the time you get there, it's like
Then it doesn't
you,
make
you
sense.
sort of overpaid for it. So that being said, I can talk with some people and see what they think. And if it's worth pushing it a year and we don't think that it's going to impact the rate, then we should do that. Because if it's not going to impact the rate and we don't pay for it, then we should.
Right.
So yeah, we'll have some conversations about that.
But isn't the theory in that scenario that we would be doing a CIP bond at that point? So it would be, what, 0.5% less anyway in interest?
You don't know at that time though,
We don't, yeah, exactly. We
You
don't
don't
know
know
what the market
what's the
conditions would
market gonna
be.
be in 2032. Or 33. That's why I asked the question.
Sure, it'll be wherever it is, it's 0.5%, whatever the bond, the lease revenue bond would be at that point, but it might still be higher than the 4.26 or whatever we get.
I wouldn't make any predictions on where the market would be at any point in time, but we'll have the conversation about call
Okay.
dates.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? Otherwise, a motion would be in order.
They pay for it. The rest of the people don't really want to pay for it.
We're up at the council. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, council, any other questions for Jessica or for Adam? Otherwise, motions would be in order.
Mayor,
Yes, sir.
sorry, President, I'd like to make a motion. Motion to approve the municipal advisory service agreement between the Otsego Economic Development Authority and Northland Securities, Inc.
Second.
Motion by Jeff, seconded by Brittany. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Motion passes 3-1.
Madam President,
Yes.
motion to adopt resolution 2024-04, providing for the competitive negotiated sale of lease revenue bonds, series 2024A.
Second.
Motion by Jeff, seconded by Brittany. Is there any discussion?
Madam President,
Yes.
we are using the EDA for one reason, and one reason only, to prevent a citizen's petition. The CIP bond would be less expensive, less risky, and far more common. However, a CIP bond would have made this project susceptible to a citizen's petition to potentially put this issue on the ballot. 2 years ago, the city of Kaysen put a ballot question to the voters for a public safety bond on a new fire station. Earlier this year, the city of Albert Lea put a bond question to the citizens in a special election for an activity center. Just last week, the city of St. Cloud had an item on their ballot asking voters to approve a bond for a new fire station. But Otsego residents aren't to be trusted with their own money. I actually reached out to the city of St. Cloud to try to understand how it came to be that this issue would go on the ballot. And they responded that they put these on the ballot administratively. That historically speaking, St. Cloud has always asked questions of the public before doing larger projects. If only the citizens of Otsego were treated with the same respect. All the talk about better communication, transparency, community engagement, that's all it is, talk. It's lip service to ideals that will never be followed and can never be followed. When a city council will use loopholes to prevent citizens from having a say in how their money is spent. I did my best to try to find a single example of a city using EDA lease revenue bonds to fund a fire station, and I couldn't find one. There have certainly been cities who use them to avoid a petition on other projects, and those cities should be ashamed of those actions, just as we should be ashamed of this one. I will not be supporting it.
Is there any more discussion?
On the one hand, I feel as your council member, there's been a lot of naysayers, a lot of people who, to me, want to defund public service and public safety. I've seen a lot of comments by residents. Either in public safety, there was a property taxes would go up 35%. If we went by my property taxes at 4,600, that 35% would be over $1,500. Use that as an average by over 7,000 houses. That's over 10 million a year. This, according to that comment, 10 million a year. The only bright side with that comment is that this fire station will be paid off in 2 years. Okay, then we move on. Okay, that was a good comment. There was a comment last council meeting of 45% in our city property taxes. Well, again, going by mine, which I believe was $960 for my city property taxes. That's almost, I'd say $400. $400 by over 7,000 houses is 2.8 million. Now going by this at 1.4 million, it's a little less than 2.8. And also, resident made a comment on a mayor forum that was 54%. And then I've also read online that our property taxes go up 63%. So the best thing to do for council to do is put everything on the table. Here it is. But we've had so much backlash, and with residents telling me enough is enough, get it done. That's what I've been told as your council member. So as getting it done, I've seen 1.7, but now we're down to 1.4 thanks to council sending it to bond, or excuse me, sending it to bid. Then we actually know the price compared to the last project. We sent it, we try to put everything down on paper, but you have to over plan it. Better to over plan it and overdo everything to it, then send it and then find out, oh, okay, this is much better. So whether it's interference, whichever, it's getting it done. Plus, when you have 1.7, and then if we do send it to CIP, delayed 6 months, this is time sensitive since we have to pay our 3 neighbors. I mean, we can't have Otsego without fire services. So if we do, we have to pay them at least 6 months. So if it's due 1.8 million, that's 900,000. To what would we save? If it was 850,000 full price at 32 million, now that's less. We're actually saving money right now. To me. So to me, this is why I went this way, EDA. No, there's lots of comments, which I appreciate. So there's no interference. We saved money, no 6-month delay. This is on schedule for Jan 1, 2027. That's what I voted yes for, on schedule. Thank you to our neighbors for covering us for so long. Thank you for our relationships. Hopefully none of the comments or what the stuff you've been seeing hasn't burnt any bridges. Thank you for everything, Elk River, Albertville, and Rogers.
We have a motion on the table. Is there any more discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Motion passes 3-1.
Madam President,
Yes.
motion to schedule a meeting of the Otsego Economic Development Authority on December 9th, 2024 at 5:30 p.m. to be held at Perry Center for discussion and consideration of award of the lease revenue bonds series 2024A.
Second.
Motion by Jeff, seconded by Brittany. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Motion passes 3-1. All right. Adam, moving on to old business. Nothing listed.
Madam President, no items under old business.
Moving on to reports.
Transitioning to reports, looking for preference on scheduling the annual meeting of the Economic Development Authority, whether the timeline should be at the beginning of the year, February, March, sometime in Q1. I can prepare an RCA to call for that meeting as part of the December 9th meeting. So preference on earlier the better, later in the year. Earlier the better.
Earlier, yeah.
All right.
Obviously, Ryan and I are speaking for that, but if you could reach out to the other.
Yep.
Newly elected.
All right.
I don't know if it, are you thinking first meeting in January or? second meeting?
Likely, I'd probably target the second meeting, maybe prior to the city council meeting to allow the new council members to be sworn in.
Sworn in.
and Have the second January meeting as economic development.
Sound good? All right. Anything else?
Nothing else.
Okay. Then a motion to adjourn would be in order.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Brittany, seconded by Jeff. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. The meeting is ended. Thank you all for attending.